Hi everyone, my name is Bailey Burns, and this is my individual presentation on this book. Sole purpose to have a prop while I did this video. This is The Moon Rush, The New Space Race by Leonard David. It was published earlier this year by National Geographic, which was added an interesting element of like very modern day but published work. It was really good. I would say it wasn't, I focus on two chapters in particular because it's hard to present on an entire book. So I did chapter 5, which is laying a new foundation, and chapter 7, which is giving the moon the business. So kind of with that in mind, knowing that he talked about a lot more than just these things. Chapter 5 was more about past like research missions and stuff like that, and where we're going and what we know about the moon. So it talked a lot about resources, so I'm going to talk about that now. Obviously, the biggest one he talks about is water, having H2O for hydrogen and oxygen for humans, water for human consumption. He talked a lot about the radiation shielding, which I think is not something that we've covered enough about how awesome water is for space exploration. He mentioned that sodium and potassium are in the atmosphere, probably from like some sort of meteorite flyby collision, something like that. So that's there. He talked a lot about the rare earth metals and helium-3, helium-3 being that important energy source that is another huge economic factor. So some of the specific materials he talked about, I listed kind of a lot of them below. He gave a really good list of kind of percentages, so I was going to read that off. We've got 43% oxygen, 20% silicon, 19% magnesium, 10% iron, 3% calcium, 3% aluminum, and then there's some other smaller percentages. The one I did want to point out is uranium. I thought that was very interesting. I didn't know there was uranium on the moon, and it's small. It's like 0.05%, but just kind of the wide range of possibilities that we have with all these materials. It's pretty crazy. So that's why I think it is important to start utilizing the moon's resources. I think these are kind of more the softer resources he talked about that I think are very important. He also used them a lot more in the logistics kind of side of why we do need to do this. One of them being rocket fuel. We've talked about that a lot with water, H and O becoming hydrogen and oxygen to rocket fuel. He talked a decent about solar energy, which I thought was interesting. Definitely whenever we talk about the logistics of having a lunar economy, we need to have a way to power it. And solar energy is the fastest way to do it right now. I know helium-3 is being talked about in the future, but solar energy is the more immediate future than that, which is something he discussed and just kind of how important it was. He talked about storage of solar energy. Being able to store the oxygen or the water from everything is pretty easy to do. We just freeze it in one of the craters that's always in the shadowed areas, and it's stored. It's there. We're good. It's frozen. But solar energy is a harder thing to store, which I thought was interesting. He talked about space, not like outer space, but like physical space, and how the moon offered the space to build an infrastructure, which I thought was something that we don't talk about enough, is that we're trying to build a whole new economy here, and having the actual room to do that is something we don't necessarily have here on Earth. And the last kind of important resource that I think he talked about was the vacuum environment and the low gravity environment, something that we talked about briefly in the beginning, but not so much since then. David talked about how many things are produced here on Earth in a vacuum environment. So if we could get the material on the moon and make it on the moon, which is almost a near perfect vacuum environment, then just ship it back with whatever load is coming back to Earth, we could save a lot of time, money, energy, that kind of stuff. So yeah, like we would save, we don't need clean rooms as much and here on Earth, and we'd have a vacuum. He talked about specifically for semiconductors, optical coating material, and the thin film on solar cells were the three technologies that are, all three of those are actually growing here on Earth incredibly quickly. So if we can find a way to produce them more quickly, then we would be helping the economy here on Earth as well. So those were all interesting points. In terms of methods, he talked a lot about kind of what we've already done to get to the future point. So methodology is a little bit harder to find in the space resources sense, since we haven't started space resources. He talked about mining a little bit, just some kind of basic ideas. But the thing that I really liked about what he did was he talked more about the issues we see with mining, which I don't think was something that we've covered quite as well as I'd want in this class. We obviously want to start mining for water specifically at the poles. We figured that out. But apparently at the poles, the regolith is fluffier, is how he put it, is fluffier than we've seen at the Apollo landing sites. So that provides us a lot of we don't know if our rover wheels can get through that, or if we can even build an infrastructure to do this. And then the other issue being the poles are cold, and we can't use the thermal extraction methods that we want to use on meteorites and asteroids and stuff like that. We're going to have to play a different game, and we don't quite know what that game is yet, according to him. We've got some ideas, but we don't know what that's going to be. So between the regolith and thermal issues, mining is going to be a little bit difficult. He talked a little bit about energy. I discussed that a little bit earlier with solar panels, and then also with helium-3, that those two things are very important in building this kind of permanent presence that we want to see on the moon. Talked, like I said, mostly about storage and how to actually get that up and running, which was good to hear. Lastly, I don't know if you can consider it a method, but he talked a lot about international and commercial efforts. The second part, the chapter 7, which was giving the Earth the business, was more about bringing in commercial entities, which was a great thing that he dedicated an entire chapter to that. I really enjoyed that. And then throughout the book, he talks about what international efforts are right now and kind of what they've been doing in the past. His findings, overall, I would say his point of writing this book is that timeliness matters. We might be kind of racing against the clock, I guess is the term to use, when it comes to space resources. And that kind of ties into my third point here, drawing on Apollo energy. Like I said, this was a from beginning to future of what we want to do with lunar resources. And to do that, he wrote an entire section on the Apollo mission and energy and how excited everyone is about that. And I think he kind of used that throughout the book to push how exciting this is. But it only lasts for so long. The timeliness matters part comes from the public is like, yes, let's go do this. They're ripe for the picking is the way it's been put. They're ready for these lunar missions again, but only for so long. If we keep pushing this down the line and saying, just wait, we're getting there, the public's going to lose interest. And then we're back at square one where we have to start funding all over again and getting the public involved all over again. And it's kind of an uphill battle again. So I think his huge point was we got to get this moving now, which I think is a huge finding that people don't really talk about when they get so into the technical and stuff like that, that you forget that the public is a huge resource in this regard. And the other big finding was international efforts. He did a lot of talk about past research from India and China and Japan and ESA. One particular, he talked about the Clementine mission in 1994, which is where we first found water, and he explained how that jump-started a lot of international probes going to the moon to research the water that we found at the poles, which I thought was very interesting as well. He talked about ESA looking at different engine fuels with Smart 1, which I thought was really interesting as well. So yeah, he definitely showed that it's more than just us. So overall, I'd say this book was highly motivational. Definitely recommend it. And as I mentioned, it drew on the Apollo energy. The difference was that it did have modern day examples, so it didn't just feel like you're reading a book from the 1960s about how great Apollo was, which kind of led me to one of my bigger issues with his book, one of my critiques. First of all, it wasn't super technical. It talked about very technical things and gave you the opportunity to go research it. It gave you like a little taste, and then if you want to go research this area, you could. But then with the modern day examples, this is where I think my biggest kind of complaint with the book was. It was this history lesson turned into where we're going. And the way he did it, I mean, this guy's an author. It was very almost poetic. It just made sense. He laid everything out. It was a great outline of how this led to this, how this led to this, into what it's going to look like into the future. It's this very natural progression, very seamless. But as a result, I don't think he did a great job of exploring what else it could be, if that makes sense. He's got this one direction for what space resources will be, and if it doesn't fall into that idea, it's going to be very different from what his book kind of outlined. I don't think he covered other areas very well. Which kind of leads me into my next slide pretty well. Before I get started on that, I will say that his findings definitely check out very well. Everything he talked about should work, and it's a lot of the outline that we've been kind of researching in this class, and that got me thinking, why is that? And then as I was about to close the book, Dr. George Sowers is in this book. He does a section on the rocket fuel on behalf of ULA. His quote from the book is, "Space resources will be the third economic revolution." And when I read that, it kind of all made sense that a lot of what David's drawing on is the exact same people and ideas that we're drawing on in this class. So it very closely relates to what we're learning here. And as a result, I believe it all makes sense. Some of the things I do wish he would consider was other viewpoints, like I said, in different directions of what we could go, what different paths could be. He didn't consider other locations, such as near-Earth objects, and Mars even, which, even though this is about the moon and a lunar economy, those are important aspects that maybe should at least be mentioned. He didn't do a great job of talking about, when he was talking about the resources, if it was for like in situ or return to Earth. He didn't like make that differentiation at all, and he didn't talk about humans versus robots as much as I would have thought someone would have when they're talking about the moon. He talked about humans, and he talked about robots and rovers and stuff like that, but I think there needs to be more of a seamless transition between the two, explaining that we need both, and I think that's something he could have talked about a little bit more throughout this book. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I think it had some really great insight and findings into how we're actually going to do this moon thing, and as a result, it's great for the general public because of the way he wrote it. It all just makes sense, honestly. He wrote it in a way that you're like, yep, that seems like the next logical step, so the general public can definitely get behind it. It's also really great for space enthusiasts because, for two reasons. One, if you want to find a deeper topic, like I said, he went into a basic level of all these technical directions that we can go, so it gives you an area to start jumping off of. And it is a blueprint for what we want to do, which means a lot of us are so focused on one area of space resources that this book is a great blueprint for the big picture again, to kind of take a step back and say, oh yeah, that's what we're trying to do. So I think this book is a great tool, a great resource, if you will, into what we're trying to do with lunar resources. A lot of interesting insight into the background of what we've been doing since Apollo, from like the 70s up until modern day, and some great ideas and persuasive arguments on what we're going to do in the future. So I think that's all from me. It's a great book. Check it out. And that's all. Thanks for listening.